The city of Manhattan was a living tapestry of light from William Harrison's office on the 57th floor. Each window framed a silent, pulsating metropolis, a kingdom he had conquered through sheer will and relentless ambition. Yet, inside the expansive suite, the air was cold and sterile, smelling faintly of glass cleaner and expensive leather. The silence was profound, broken only by the almost inaudible hum of the central air and the soft, rhythmic clicking of his keyboard. The minimalist decor, a single black desk, a chrome chair, and polished concrete floors reflected the man who occupied the space. It was a fortress of success, built to keep the messy, unpredictable world at bay, a testament to a life where everything was controlled, measured, and devoid of warmth. This was his sanctuary and his prison, high above the very streets he had once fought to escape. William Harrison, a man in his late 50s, was the physical embodiment of his surroundings. His designer suit was perfectly tailored, a dark grey armor that concealed the chronic exhaustion etched into his features. His face was a mask of hardened control, his eyes cold and analytical, accustomed to dissecting balance sheets and human potential with the same detached precision. He was clearing his desk before a red-eye flight to Tokyo, and one last loose end remained: his housekeeper, Maria. The reason for her dismissal was trivial, a minor lapse that his mind had magnified into an unforgivable breach of efficiency. He had no time or inclination to handle this face-to-face. For him, emotions were a liability, a weakness he had purged from himself decades ago. Firing an employee was not a personal matter, it was simply a business decision, a necessary adjustment to maintain a flawless system. He picked up his state-of-the-art smartphone, its sleek surface cool against his skin, and dialed his own residence. He expected to hear Maria's respectful, slightly nervous voice, allowing him to deliver the news quickly and move on. Instead, the voice that answered was small and sweet, a child's hesitant hello. A flicker of annoyance crossed William's face. He asked to speak with Maria, his tone clipped and impatient. There was a pause on the other end, a moment of childish calculation as the young girl sensed the cold urgency in his voice. Then she spoke again, her words not a question but a desperate, firm plea that cut through the sterile air of his office. The line that would unravel his carefully constructed world was delivered with a clarity that belied her age, a raw and unfiltered truth that he had not encountered in years. "Please, don't fire my mommy. If you do, we won't have anything to eat." The words hung in the air, echoing in the vast emptiness of the office. For a moment, the entire city outside seemed to go silent. The only sound was the faint, shaky breath of the little girl on the other end of the line. William was speechless, his hand frozen, the phone pressed against his ear. The ruthless CEO, the man who could dismantle corporations without a second thought, was completely disarmed by a 7-year-old's plea. He couldn't form a response. He abruptly ended the call, the silence that rushed back in now feeling heavy and suffocating. It's remarkable how a single, unexpected moment can shatter a lifetime of convictions. If you believe in the power of stories that reveal our shared humanity, subscribing to our channel allows us to continue sharing them. The rest of the night was a blur of meaningless tasks. William tried to focus on the spreadsheets for the Tokyo merger, but the numbers swam before his eyes, replaced by the ghost of a child's voice. The city lights, once a symbol of his power and domain, now seemed like millions of tiny, accusing eyes, each one a window into a life he had chosen to ignore. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling window, a king in an empty castle, feeling a profound and unfamiliar sense of dislocation. For decades, he had built walls around his heart, fortifying himself with wealth and control, but a 7-year-old girl had breached them with 7 simple words. The silence in his office was no longer a comfort. It was a vacuum, and it was pulling him back into a past he had fought with every fiber of his being to escape. The plea, "We won't have anything to eat," was a key that unlocked a door in his memory he had long since bricked over. Suddenly, he was no longer a 57-year-old tycoon, but a small, shivering boy in a dimly lit kitchen in a forgotten part of Brooklyn. He could almost smell the faint, discouraging scent of boiled cabbage and feel the cold, cracked linoleum beneath his bare feet. He remembered his own mother, her shoulders slumped in defeat at the kitchen table, trying to hide her tears as she told him there would be no dinner that night, only the next. He recalled the gnawing ache in his stomach, a physical pain that was secondary to the crushing weight of her silent shame. That boy had sworn he would never feel that powerless again, and in his relentless climb he had forgotten the very pain that fueled him. He drove home on autopilot, his luxury sedan gliding through the neon-drenched streets of Manhattan. But for the first time, he wasn't insulated from the city. He was part of its raw, pulsing undercurrent. He saw the tired faces on the late-night bus, the street vendor packing up his cart, the young couple laughing as they shared a single slice of pizza. These were the people he had rendered invisible, the details he had streamlined out of his life's balance sheet. A bitter, cynical voice in his head tried to rationalize his actions, reminding him that compassion was a liability and that the world was built on a foundation of winners and losers. He had always been a winner, but tonight, that victory felt hollow, a Pyrrhic triumph that had cost him his own soul. He was driving a $100,000 car, yet he felt poorer than he had as a child. Sleep offered no refuge. In his sprawling penthouse apartment, surrounded by priceless art and minimalist furniture, he tossed and turned under sheets of the finest Egyptian cotton. The little girl's shaky breath on the phone echoed louder than the city's hum. He got up and walked into his state-of-the-art kitchen, the motion sensor lights illuminating a space that looked more like a showroom than a place for cooking. He opened the oversized stainless steel refrigerator and was met with a blast of cold air. It was filled to bursting with organic produce, gourmet cheeses, and imported beverages, most of which his personal chef used, and he rarely touched. The sheer, obscene abundance of it all was a physical blow. He had so much, yet he had been about to take away the little that someone else had. He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing his own self-disgust. As the first grey light of dawn broke over the East River, William knew he couldn't go to Tokyo. He couldn't sit in another sterile boardroom and negotiate another multi-billion-dollar deal while the memory of that child's plea for food haunted him. He looked at his reflection in the dark glass of his window and saw not a powerful CEO, but a tired, lonely man whose success was a cage. In that moment, he made a decision that was completely illogical, inefficient, and utterly foreign to his nature. He picked up his phone, cancelled his 9 o'clock meeting with a curt message, and then accessed his company's HR portal. He found Maria Ramirez's file and wrote down her address. It's moments like these, when we choose to listen to that small voice of empathy, that redefine our entire lives. If our stories help you connect with that part of yourself, please consider subscribing and helping us share more of them. The drive to Queens was a journey to another world. The gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan receded in his rearview mirror, replaced by a dense landscape of brick apartment buildings, bustling bodegas, and elevated train tracks that cast long, moving shadows on the streets below. The air itself seemed to change, growing thick with the smells of street food and the sounds of a dozen different languages. He felt a profound sense of being an intruder as his polished black sedan, a vessel of corporate power, navigated the narrow, crowded streets. It drew curious, resentful stares, marking him as an outsider. This was the city he had worked so hard to rise above, the very world he had scrubbed from his personal history, And now he was driving right back into its heart, feeling more vulnerable than he had in 30 years. He found the address on a street lined with aging 6-story walk-ups. The building's facade was worn, its fire escapes zigzagging like iron scars down its front. He stepped out of his car, and the contrast between his tailored suit and the gritty sidewalk was jarring. Inside, the hallway was narrow and smelled of old paint, disinfectant, and the lingering aroma of fried onions. The sounds of life were everywhere. A baby crying in a nearby apartment, a television blaring in Spanish, the muffled rhythm of music from an upper floor. It was a symphony of human existence, messy and vibrant and real. He climbed the worn steps to the 4th floor and stood before apartment 4B, his hand hovering over the door. Every instinct he had honed for decades screamed at him to turn around, to get back in his car and fly to Tokyo. When the door opened, he was met with the face of a woman in her late 30s, her expression a fragile mask of exhaustion and worry. It was Maria. Her eyes widened in shock and then narrowed with a deep, defensive fear. She clutched the collar of her simple robe, her posture immediately guarded. To her, the sudden, unannounced appearance of her immensely powerful and distant employer on her doorstep could mean only one thing. He had come to deliver the final blow in person, to fire her face to face in her own home, in front of her child. The humiliation of it washed over her, and her face hardened with a quiet, pained dignity. She said nothing, simply waiting for the words she knew were coming, bracing herself for the impact they would have on her and her daughter's fragile world. William's gaze was drawn past Maria to the small figure peeking from behind her leg. It was a little girl with enormous, dark eyes that held a universe of worry, yet also a flicker of innocent curiosity. She was wearing faded pajamas with cartoon characters on them, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. This was Lily. This was the voice. Seeing her in person was 1,000 times more impactful than hearing her over the phone. The sterile, corporate problem he had intended to solve now had a face, a home, and a pair of eyes that looked at him as if he held the entire world in his hands. The apartment behind them was tiny, but meticulously clean. A child's colourful drawing of a sun and a small house was taped to the wall, a beacon of hope in the modest room. He opened his mouth to speak, but the carefully constructed sentences he had rehearsed in the car evaporated. Words like restructuring, efficiency, and corporate policy felt like a foreign language here, obscene in their detachment. "Maria," he began, his voice sounding rough and unfamiliar to his own ears. I came to talk about our phone call yesterday." Maria's expression didn't soften. She pulled Lily slightly closer, a protective gesture that was both subtle and fierce. "There is nothing to talk about, Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice low but steady. "If you are going to fire me, please just do it. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Her quiet resignation was more cutting than any accusation. She was prepared for his cruelty, and that realization shamed him to his very core. He looked around the small living room, taking in the details he had only glimpsed before. The couch was well worn, its floral pattern faded from years of use. The small television sat on a stack of milk crates disguised with a tablecloth. A handful of books were neatly arranged on a makeshift shelf. It was a home built not with money, but with love and resilience. In every corner, he saw echoes of his own childhood, of his mother's tireless efforts to create a safe and dignified space amidst crushing poverty. He saw the same fierce, protective love in Maria's eyes that he remembered in his mother's. It wasn't just Lily's voice that had broken through his defenses. It was this entire scene, a living tableau of the life he had both fled from and, in some strange way, desperately missed. The air in the room was thick with unspoken fears. He saw the tremor in Maria's hand as she held the doorknob, the way Lily's wide eyes darted from his face to her mother's, sensing the monumental weight of this moment. William Harrison, the man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets with a single word, was completely powerless. All his wealth, all his influence, meant nothing here. He was just a man in a room with a woman and her child, the architect of their terror. The corporate titan was gone, stripped away by the raw humanity of the situation. In his place was just William, the boy from Brooklyn, standing on the precipice of a decision that would determine not just their future, but what kind of man he would be from that day forward. "I came to—" William started, his voice a low rumble that felt out of place in the small, quiet apartment. He cleared his throat, searching for a script that didn't exist. "And I came to discuss the terms of your employment." The words were cold, clinical, and utterly wrong. He saw Maria visibly flinch, her spine straightening as she braced for the inevitable. Her hand tightened on Lily's shoulder, a silent message of protection. He felt like a clumsy giant in a dollhouse, his expensive suit a ridiculous costume, his presence an act of violence. Every calculated word he had ever used to dominate a boardroom was now a blunt instrument, incapable of navigating the delicate landscape of human fear. The silence that followed was excruciating, filled only by the distant wail of a siren and the frantic beating of his own heart. His gaze fell from Maria's guarded face to the small child beside her. Lily wasn't hiding anymore. She was looking right at him, her dark eyes wide and unblinking, not with fear, but with a profound and unnerving curiosity. It was in that gaze that William finally broke. He saw the ghost of a small boy in a cold Brooklyn flat, staring at a landlord who held their fate in his hands. He saw the faded crayon drawing of a sun taped to the wall behind her, a desperate splash of color in a world of muted grays. And it felt more valuable than any piece of art hanging in his penthouse. The entire edifice of his life, built on the premise of escaping that past, crumbled under the weight of a 7-year-old's steady stare. He wasn't a CEO anymore. He was just a man haunted by the boy he had abandoned. "That's not true," he said, the words finally coming out, raw and unpolished. "I didn't come here to talk about your job." Maria's brow furrowed in confusion. He took a small, hesitant step into the room, his hands slightly raised in a gesture of surrender. "Your daughter's voice on the phone yesterday. It reminded me of who I used to be, a long time ago." He paused, the confession hanging in the air, heavy and fragile. "And I have to tell you, Maria, I didn't like the man I've become." For the first time, the defensive armor in Maria's eyes cracked, replaced by a flicker of stunned comprehension. She was no longer looking at her boss. She was looking at a man confessing his own bankruptcy of spirit on her worn-out welcome mat. He knew words were not enough. They were cheap, and he had a lifetime of using them to his advantage. Action was the only currency that mattered now. "You're not fired, Maria. In fact, I came here to offer you a new position. I want you to be my house manager. You'll oversee the entire property, the staff, everything. The salary will be enough that you never have to worry about what's for dinner again." He then knelt, so his eyes were level with Lily's. "And for you," he said, his voice softer than he thought possible, "I am setting up a trust. It will pay for your education all the way through college, to any school you want to go to. All you have to do is promise to keep drawing those beautiful suns." A single tear traced a path down Maria's cheek, followed by another. It was a quiet, stunned release of a pressure she had been living under for years. She nodded, unable to form words, her hand covering her mouth. Lily, sensing the profound shift in the room's emotional current, took a tentative step away from her mother. She walked toward this strange, sad man in the expensive suit, the man who had terrified her and then made her mother cry with happiness. In her small hand, she held out a slightly crumpled piece of paper. It was another drawing, this one of a small stick-figure family standing beside a house. William reached out with a trembling hand and took it, the simple gift feeling heavier and more precious than any stock certificate he had ever held. That simple drawing became a covenant, the first article in a new constitution for William's life. He didn't just give Maria a promotion, he actively mentored her, recognizing her sharp intelligence and organizational skills that had been previously overlooked. He ensured she had the resources and training to excel, not as an act of charity, but as a smart investment in a capable person. For Lily, the college trust was just the beginning. He began spending weekends with them, taking them to museums he had only ever visited for sterile corporate galas, or simply walking through Central Park, rediscovering the city through a child's eyes. The cold, empty penthouse began to fill with the sounds of laughter and the scent of Maria's home cooking, slowly transforming from a monument to his isolation into a genuine home, a place of warmth and belonging he never knew he craved. The change in William Harrison sent shockwaves through his company. He, the architect of ruthless efficiency, began championing policies centered on human dignity. He established a fully subsidized childcare center on site, naming it the Lily Pad, after the little girl who had reminded him of his own humanity. He created a scholarship program, funded personally, to ensure the children of every one of his employees had the same educational opportunities he was giving Lily. His old business partners called him foolish, sentimental, and weak. They predicted his downfall. Instead, employee morale soared, productivity increased, and the company became known not just for its profits, but for its compassion. He learned that true strength wasn't about building walls to keep the world out, but about having the courage to tear them down and let people in. Over the next decade, the three of them forged an unbreakable bond, becoming an unconventional but deeply loving family. William was no longer the fearsome CEO, but simply Will, a constant, reassuring presence in Lily's life. He was there for every scraped knee, every school project, and every triumphant report card. He taught her about business, not with spreadsheets, but by showing her how a company could be a force for good. Maria, in turn, managed his life with a grace and wisdom that brought him a peace he had never known. She became his confidant, his friend, and the steady anchor in his world. He had spent a lifetime chasing success, believing it was a solitary pursuit, only to find that the richest treasures in life are those that can only be found and shared with others. On a sun-drenched afternoon, William sat in the front row of a university graduation ceremony, his hair now more grey than black, a genuine smile etched onto his face. Maria sat beside him, her hand clutching his, both of them watching with pride as Lily, the valedictorian, walked across the stage to receive her diploma. In her speech, she spoke not of corporate success, but of the immense power of empathy. As her eyes met William's across the crowd, he saw not just gratitude, but the reflection of a better man, the man he had become because a 7-year-old girl had dared to speak the truth. He had found a purpose far greater than any business deal, a legacy written not in stock prices, but in a young woman's bright and limitless future. Sharing these journeys of the human heart is what we live for, and by subscribing, you become a vital part of keeping such stories alive.